This presentation of Road to Zion is made possible in part by a generous grant from Angel Partners. Angel Partners, committed to the programs, services, and technologies that support family values and lifelong learning.
Palmyra, New York, a charming village situated along the Erie Canal near the Finger Lakes district of New York State. At the turn of the 19th century, with its fertile soil and heavily wooded land, this area was prime real estate. Communities and family homesteads were popping up all over the region. By 1820, the conditions in this area would become just right for growth of another kind, the restoration of the gospel. Today, my journey will take me from downtown Palmyra out to the Smith family farm, where I'll tour both their log and frame homes, followed by a walk through the nearby sacred grove. Just 3 miles down the road, I'll climb the Hill Cumorah, and then venture into town for a tour of the Grandin Press building, where the first edition of the Book of Mormon was published. After visiting the Peter Whitmer farm, site of the formal organization of the church, I'll finish my visit at picturesque Seneca Lake, where many of the first members were baptized.
One, two, three, 4 churches, 4 denominations, 1 intersection. Not something you see every day. In fact, this is the only place you'll see it in the entire United States, and it's right here in Palmyra, New York. Now, although none of these churches actually existed in the early days of the Restoration, the first one being built in 1832, the denominations were definitely going strong at that time. And I have to say that standing here among these churches does give you a strong visual sense of the intense religious atmosphere of 1820s Palmyra.
The Four Corners churches, as they're known today, stand at the end of historic Main Street in the heart of Palmyra Village. And just a couple miles south of the village proper, along the quiet country roads, you'll find the Smith family farm, where Joseph Smith Jr. spent his boyhood years. Today, the farm consists of a replica of the Smiths' original log home, their restored frame home, and the nearby sacred grove, all within easy walking distance of each other.
I'm standing here in the middle of the Smith family farm, and this is a replica of the first home they built in 1818. Now, as you can see, it's a 1.5-story log home, and Joseph Smith Sr., Lucy Mack Smith, and their 9 children all called this place home for 10 years. Now, like many other families in this area, their lives were filled with hard work on a farm and faithful Bible study. In fact, it was here that Joseph read the Bible and decided to pray for direction. Let's go take a look. Wow, this is small. You know, I've been told that the Smith family was a pretty tight-knit family. Looking around, I think you'd have to be, living in quarters like this. You know, and it was probably around a table just like this that Joseph, along with his other family members, were instructed from the Bible by their parents.
And of course, those spiritual seeds planted in Joseph by his parents and his own hours of Bible study and meditation eventually came to a magnificent fruition in the nearby sacred grove. I'll visit the grove myself in a few minutes, but first, I'm headed upstairs to Joseph and his siblings' bedrooms.
It had been 3 years since Joseph had his vision in the sacred grove. He hadn't heard anything. He didn't know what to do. He
He didn't know where to go. So once again, he turned to prayer. And in the middle of the night, the angel Moroni appeared to him to give him further instruction. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, all while his brothers and sisters slept. And it's in this very space that it all happened.
The following day, after the visits from the angel Moroni, Joseph went to the Hill Cumorah and was shown the gold plates for the first of many times. It's sobering to think about the significance of the many spiritual events that took place in and around such a simple log home. According to Lucy Smith, Joseph's mother, it was pretty normal for her family to offer up their secret prayers in the grove of trees near their house. And you can see why. It's right next door. And with 11 people living in this tiny house, it was probably pretty hard to find a quiet moment alone. This grove of trees looks like just the right spot. Fortunately, the 10-acre sacred grove has remained in its native state ever since Joseph's time, allowing you to get a real sense of what it must have been like for him to wander through the grove. There are several trails open to the public that meander beneath the canopy of majestic trees, some of which are more than 200 years old. As you wander along the paths and enjoy the grove's natural and peaceful beauty, be sure to stop and read the markers stationed along the path that describe what life was like on the Smith family farm. By the time Joseph had acquired the plates from Moroni, the Smith family had moved across the farm to slightly more luxurious lodgings. Now, this frame home was built in 1825, and it was the place of much drama for the Smith family, which by that time also included Joseph's new bride, Emma. Construction on this home was actually started by Joseph's older brother, Alvin, before he died in 1823. After 2 more years of work by Joseph Sr. and his sons, the entire Smith family moved in. On the night that Joseph retrieved the plates from the Hill Cumorah, the very first place he brought them was here, the Smith home. Now, he had to rely on a lot of inspiration to move those plates around and keep them safe from the mobs that were constantly here trying to take those plates away. And the very first place he ever brought those plates to hide them was right here. This fireplace, and underneath the hearth right here was where he put them. Took the bricks out, moved the dirt away, placed them in a box, and hid them here. And there were other times when he had to shift and move those plates from place to place. But the thing that impresses me the most is Joseph's family. 8 of the living children that were here had all had an opportunity to take care of those plates or hide them. Not once did any of those family members ever take a peek and look at those plates. The trust factor was high in this family. Pretty amazing. Talk about family trust. One night when the mob was pursuing the plates yet again, Joseph's 2 sisters who slept in this room were asked to place the plates between them, wrapped in a blanket. Now, Lucy Mack told them, stay still, be quiet, and just pretend you're asleep. So when the mobs entered in, Lucy Mack Smith asked them, please leave the girls alone. Don't disturb the girls. So the mobs looked under the bed, checked through the room, and then left those girls behind clutching those plates to their hearts. A lot of things going on in this house. For instance, in this very room, Martin Harris broke the news that he lost the 116-page manuscript. Can you even imagine
how Joseph Smith must have felt. He pressed the Lord 3 different times for permission. Can you imagine the amount of pacing, nervous pacing that must have been done in this room? Also, Oliver Cowdery lived with the Smith family. He was a school teacher at a school not far from here, and this is the place where he heard the message of the gospel, prayed about it, gained his own testimony. Good place.
Due to financial troubles, the Smith family only lived in this home for 4 years before they had to move back into the log home at the other end of the farm. And within 2 years after that, the family moved away from the farm entirely, never to return to Palmyra. Be sure to allow at least 2 hours for your visit to the Smith family farm. There's a lot of ground to cover. Besides visiting the Smith family homes and the Sacred Grove, take time to visit Joseph Sr.'s cooper or barrel making shop and the threshing barn, stopping along the way to read the informational markers. Next, I'm headed just 3 miles down the road from the Smith family farm to the Hill Cumorah. Before exploring the hillside itself, be sure to take some time to tour the visitor center at the base of the hill. You can spend at least a full hour touring the center, reviewing the details of Joseph's many visits to the Hill Cumorah. The center features several interactive displays, presentations, and works of art. You'll also want to catch at least one of the 15 different videos offered in the theater. There is a road you can drive from the visitor center to the top of the hill, but if you've got the time, try instead the walking path through the trees along the north face. It's well worth it. Here I go. In the decades after Joseph's visits here, the hill was stripped bare of its trees. But in the 1920s, it was reforested to look a little more like it did in Joseph's time. Walking the path allows you to enjoy the beauty of the hill and reflect on the significance of the site. I highly recommend this hike. Like many other hills in the area, Cumorah is technically a glacial drumlin formed during the last ice age. Now it rises 117 feet high and extends 1.5 miles long. And presiding over it, we have a 40-foot monument of the Angel Moroni. Erected in 1935, the monument also includes several bronze panels depicting the events that led to the translation of the Book of Mormon. As you may know, each summer, the Hill Cumorah is the site of a spectacular outdoor pageant. The pre-production, America's Witness for Christ, attracts audiences of up to 100,000 people. And while you're at the top of the hill, be sure to take a moment and enjoy the view of the hill and the surrounding farmland. It really gives you the chance to think about the true meaning of the site. You know, I'm a pretty simple, basic person. I like things that are easy to understand. And I think one of the most important things I've drawn from this experience is that I think our Heavenly Father wants it to be that way. Take a simple boy, simple 14-year-old boy, a simple place, a simple hill, and place something in it that will change the world. That's important to me.
Venturing back into the village of Palmyra, you'll find the Book of Mormon Historic Publications site, or the Grandin Press Building.
By mid-August 1829, Joseph and his colleagues had finished the translation process and had prepared a printer's copy of the Book of Mormon. After negotiating with several other printers, they finally settled on bringing it here, the Egbert B. Grandin Press. Now, over the course of 7.5 months and at a cost of $3,000, Grandin printed 5,000 first edition copies of the Book of Mormon. Now, this building has been restored to look just as it did when printing was completed in 1830. Go take a look. Well, this is Grandin's bookstore, the Barnes & Noble of its time, minus the deli and the giant brownies. Obviously, they sold books here. Now, I'm told that this was also the setting for many social gatherings. People could come here and read, play games. I'm sure it was a hotbed of debate in regards to religious issues, considering what was going on in Palmyra at the time. Most importantly, this store was the first to carry and sell the first edition copy of the Book of Mormon. Now, I think over here we have Grandin's office. Now, this office was where the contract was signed for the printing of the Book of Mormon. Now, incidentally, Grandin didn't even want to take on this project in the first place. I mean, considering what was going on in Palmyra at the time. But his colleagues counseled him that this would be a good business move. I mean, $3,000, that's a lot of money for a small village press. Can you just imagine Joseph Smith Sr., Joseph Smith Jr., and Martin Harris sitting here finalizing the terms of their contract? Let me just give you a small idea of the magnitude of this project. 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon. First off, it started with stacks and stacks of paper brought in from the Erie Canal. And then the real tedious work began. The typesetter, he's Superman to me. He would take a piece of manuscript, read through it, and you have to remember that Oliver Cowdery was writing as quickly as Joseph Smith was translating, so there wasn't a lot of punctuation. So the typesetter had an added task of adding punctuation, and then setting the type one letter at a time. Now, mind you, he had a more organized font than this, but could you imagine having to set type one letter at a time, upside down and backwards? I'm done. Once a page was created and 16 pages were done, he would put it in this frame, bring the frame over to the press, and begin the printing process. A little ink, a little press, ow, and the process was done. 5,000 copies. This process, just printing the pages alone, took 7.5 months. And not only that, Grandin had his business as well to take care of. He was printing newspapers and ads, and it was full-time work. So this labor-intensive process continued down here on the second floor, where the pages were folded, then they were bound, they were glued together, and then they were cut, and finally a high-quality sheepskin leather was wrapped around them. Then they were embossed, and gold leaf lettering was placed on them. Now, could it have been done more cheaply? Sure. It could have been a paperback. The paper could have been cheaper. But all of these elements came together, I think, because Joseph wanted to create a high-quality product, something you could really feel, examine, open, and read. This book cost about 60 cents to make and about $1.25 to sell. Back then, that was 2 days' wages. It took a lot of faith to buy this book and then read it. I think this book was meant to make an impression, a really great impression.
Tours of the Book of Mormon Historic Publication site are given daily throughout the year. The Visitor Center includes the restored Grandin Press offices as well as informational modules throughout the building. Next, I'm traveling south through New York's Finger Lakes district to the town of Fayette and the home of one of the most significant families in the early days of the church, the Whitmers. Descendants of German immigrants, the Whitmer family was among the first to settle in Fayette. They had been working this 100-acre farm for 20 years when they first heard of Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. Within months after meeting Joseph, this homestead became the center of activities that culminated in the formal organization of the church.
So much happened in and around this tiny log house. The translation of the Book of Mormon was completed here. The 3 witnesses were shown the gold plates just beyond the yard. The official organization of the church happened here. I mean, can you imagine nearly 50 people crammed inside this tiny thing? And as headquarters of the church, this was the site of 3 general conferences. Not to mention, this was a working, functioning farm. Busy, busy place. Wow. You know, the Whitmers played a huge role in the early organization of the church. I mean, they didn't even know Joseph Smith. Oliver Cowdery introduced them, and they had only corresponded through letters up to this point. But on April 6th, 1830, they offered up this home and turned it into a meeting place. It's such a small space, I'm sure they had to take nearly everything out just to accommodate the mass that was going to be in here. Can you just imagine all those would-be eager members of the church ready for this first meeting? I'm told that it was a simple meeting, presided over by a prophet of God, Joseph Smith, 24 years old. I would have loved to have been there that day.
The events of that momentous day included the sustaining of the first elders of the church, along with the ordinations and the administering of the sacrament. Afterwards, several individuals, including members of Joseph's family, came forward and were baptized members of the new church. Several months earlier, the Whitmers had opened their home to Joseph and Oliver Cowdery as a safe haven for them to complete the translation of the Book of Mormon. The final weeks of translation took place in a small, quiet bedroom upstairs, removed from the rest of the house.
I wish I could give you a sense of the space in here. I mean, it is really tight. Now, even though this is a reconstructed home, this room is similar to the room in which Oliver and Joseph translated the plates. I don't know why, but I always assumed that they were in this beautifully decorated room that was well lit and secluded. But this room is dark. The walls are extremely thin. The floorboards are every bit as thin. I mean, you can hear everything going on downstairs. I think that speaks volumes about the trust factor regarding Peter Whitmer Sr. and his large family.
must have had tremendous respect for the prophet Joseph Smith and the translation process. Building was completed on the reconstructed Whitmer log home and the adjacent colonial-style chapel and visitor center in 1980. They were then dedicated by President Spencer W. Kimball on April 6, 1980, as part of the 150th Annual General Conference, marking the sesquicentennial anniversary of the organization of the church. Tours of the Whitmer farm begin in the visitor center and last about an hour. The last step of my journey takes me to nearby Seneca Lake for a walk along its peaceful shore.
On the day the church was organized, several people were, quote, convinced of the truth and came forth to be received into the church. So they came here, Seneca Lake. Known for its clarity and great beauty, this lake and others like it became the principal place of baptism for most of the first members of the church. And as they came forward and committed themselves to the gospel, it was a clear sign that the restored Church of Jesus Christ had arrived.
I've come to the end of my journey, and it's hard to put into words what it feels like to finally visit sites like these. Sites you've heard of for years and that you hold so close to your heart without ever actually being there. And then finally, you're there. The experience is everything you'd hope for and more. But it's also best to remember that none of these sites are nearly as important as the sacred events themselves that transpired here. The sacred events that formed the cradle of the restoration. On an upcoming episode of Road to Zion, we'll travel to the gathering place, Kirtland, Ohio, where our journey will take us from Fairport Harbor on the shores of Lake Erie to the historic Kirtland Village. There, we'll visit the Newell K. Whitney Home and Store, as well as the Ashery, Sawmill, Schoolhouse, and Johnson Inn. Next, we'll venture just south of the village to the John Johnson Farm, and then end our visit at the church's crowning work in Kirtland, the Temple. Be sure to tune in.
This presentation of Road to Zion is made possible in part by a generous grant from Angel Partners. Angel Partners, committed to the programs, services, and technologies that support family values and lifelong learning.